In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the especially merciful. How could a message first proclaimed in Western Arabia transform the moral and spiritual life of much of the world? To understand the beginning of the Seerah, we must first understand the land into which the final messenger, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was born. Arabia was not an empty place cut off from history. It stood between powerful regions and busy seas. Byzantine influence stretched across lands to the northwest. The Persian Empire dominated territories to the northeast. Across the Red Sea lay the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia, while Yemen connected Arabia to older civilizations and southern trade. Yet the peninsula itself resisted simple control. Its immense deserts, rugged mountains, scattered oases, and difficult roads made travel demanding and distant rule uncertain. Along the coasts stood ports and settlements. Inland, wells and grazing grounds could determine whether a journey continued or ended. Travelers learned routes through inherited knowledge, landmarks, winds, and stars. In such a landscape, survival required patience, memory, courage, and cooperation. These qualities became deeply admired, but the same geography that encouraged independence also meant that security was often local. Beyond a protected town, alliance, or tribe, a traveler could quickly become vulnerable. Arabia was connected to the world, yet much of its life followed its own rhythms. For many Arabs, the tribe was more than an extended family. It provided identity, protection, political belonging, and the practical force behind law. A person supported by a strong clan could travel and negotiate with confidence. Someone without that protection might be ignored, exploited, or attacked with little hope of justice. Loyalty therefore carried enormous moral weight. Defending relatives, honoring agreements, sheltering guests, and remembering obligations could preserve entire communities. Hospitality was not merely polite behavior in a harsh land. Offering water, food, and safety could save a traveler's life. Generosity became a source of honor, while cowardice, betrayal, and miserliness could stain a reputation for generations. Poetry carried these reputations across Arabia. Poets preserved ancestry, praised courage, mourned the dead, celebrated generosity, and condemned enemies. At gatherings and seasonal markets, powerful words could lift a tribe's standing or deepen a dispute. But loyalty also had a dangerous edge. When justice was measured mainly by blood relationship, wrongdoing could be defended because the wrongdoer belonged to one's own group. A killing could trigger revenge. Revenge could demand another response, and a single conflict could survive long after its original cause was forgotten. Tribal protection gave order, but it did not always give equal justice. Across this varied society moved caravans carrying goods, messages, news, and relationships. Leather, cloth, food, incense, perfume, and other merchandise traveled between southern Arabia, western towns, Syria, and neighboring regions. These journeys were slow and risky. Animals needed water. Goods needed guards. Routes required agreements with communities along the way. Trade therefore depended on trust as much as it depended on wealth. Makkah held a distinctive position within this network. It was located in a difficult valley without the agricultural abundance of some other places, but it possessed the sanctuary of the Kaaba and the standing connected to it. The Quraysh, who served the sanctuary, developed commercial ties beyond the city. The Qur'an would later remind them of their familiar journeys of winter and summer, and of the security and provision granted to them. Pilgrimage and trade met in Makkah. Visitors arrived for sacred observances, while merchants exchanged goods and formed agreements. Information traveled with them. Reports of distant rulers, religious communities, conflicts, harvests, and changing markets. Makkah was therefore not important because it resembled the great imperial capitals. Its influence came from a different combination: sanctuary, lineage, reputation, negotiation, and trade. The city had no emperor, but its people understood how to maintain relationships across tribal boundaries. Pre-Islamic Arabia cannot be described truthfully with a single label. It contained qualities that Islam would affirm and refine: courage, patience, eloquence, generosity, loyalty, care for guests, and respect for promises. It also contained serious injustices that revelation would confront. Power could determine whose complaint was heard. The poor, enslaved, displaced, and people without strong protection could be treated as if their rights mattered less. Orphans could be exposed to the misuse of their property. Women could be denied inheritance or treated according to customs that varied between communities and often favored male power. The Qur'an later condemned the shame some felt at the birth of daughters and presented the buried girl as a victim who would be asked for what sin she had been killed. These condemnations should not be used to claim that every family practiced every abuse. They reveal that such wrongs existed and that revelation addressed them directly. Economic injustice also mattered. Measures could be manipulated, debts could deepen dependence, and wealth could strengthen those already protected. Enslavement was accepted across the surrounding world, and Arabia was no exception. In this environment, generosity might rescue someone for a day, but generosity alone could not replace a public moral order in which the weak possessed rights, even against the strong. At the center of Makkah stood the Kaaba, the sacred house associated in Arab memory with Ibrahim and Ismail, peace be upon them. The sanctuary gave Makkah an identity greater than its size. Around it, fighting was restricted, pilgrims gathered, and the Quraysh gained honor through service to visitors. Yet the worship practiced around the house had changed. Many Arabs still recognized Allah as creator, but they directed acts of devotion toward idols and other beings, treating them as protectors or intercessors. The Qur'an would later expose the contradiction of claiming that such worship only brought people nearer to Allah. The house connected to the worship of one God had become surrounded by inherited practices and human invention. Religion was intertwined with memory, family custom, prestige, and economic life. This made reform difficult. To question an idol was not merely to question an object. It could be heard as an attack on ancestors, tribal identity, pilgrimage customs, and the position of those who benefited from the established order. Makkah's leaders understood guardianship, negotiation, and commerce. But the same traditions that supported their status could make them fiercely resistant to a message demanding that worship belong to Allah alone, and that moral worth not be determined by wealth or lineage. Still, Arabia was not without people who sensed that inherited worship was incomplete. Jewish and Christian communities lived in and around parts of the peninsula, and travelers encountered the beliefs of neighboring lands. Some individuals rejected idol worship and searched for the religion of Ibrahim, though reports about particular people and their paths differ in detail and certainty. What is clear is that Arabia was religiously aware. Its people knew sacred months, pilgrimage, sacrifice, oaths, and the language of devotion. The problem was not that they possessed no idea of God or morality. The problem was that truth had become mixed with custom, and admirable virtues existed beside grave wrongdoing. This combination matters for understanding the message that would come. Islam would not simply erase Arabian society and replace every feature of it. It would redirect worship to Allah alone, establish accountability beyond tribe, protect rights, discipline revenge, command justice, and transform admired qualities into acts governed by revelation. Courage would no longer mean defending one's people whether right or wrong. Loyalty would be placed beneath loyalty to truth. Generosity would become an obligation as well as a source of honor. Human beings divided by lineage would be called to recognize a shared creator and a final judgment. No imperial court was watching Makkah as the center of the world's next great transformation. To the powerful, the valley may have seemed distant from the places where history was decided, yet the conditions were already present for a message that would speak far beyond Arabia. The people valued language, and the Qur'an would address them with words of unmatched force. They valued memory, and revelation would retell the lessons of earlier peoples. They valued courage, and faith would demand moral courage against persecution and pressure. They valued loyalty, and Islam would build a community joined by belief without denying the responsibilities of family and society. They knew trade, travel, and negotiation, and within a generation, the message would move along routes familiar to them and far beyond them. But before public preaching, migration, treaties, and the building of a new community, there came a year remembered throughout Arabia. Seerah accounts connect that year with an army advancing toward the Kaaba and failing to reach its goal. The Qur'an preserves the central lesson of the people of the elephant. Worldly power could not overcome the protection decreed by Allah. Into that remembered year, in Makkah, a child would be born. His name was Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. The next chapter begins with the army that marched toward the sacred house.